Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're talking about something that affects nearly every single person in retirement or planning for it, whether you realize it or not. And honestly, it's something that can quietly make or break your monthly budget if you rely on Social Security. It's the 2026 COLA forecast. That's the cost of living adjustment for Social Security benefits. And some of the new numbers are finally starting to come into focus. Now here's what's interesting and kind of surprising. The latest estimates suggest that next year's COLA increase could land somewhere between 2.4 and 3%. And while that might not sound huge at first glance, it's actually a pretty big shift from earlier projections. A lot of experts thought inflation was cooling off more quickly, but it turns out things are still a bit stickier than expected. So if you depend on Social Security, whether it makes up part or even most of your income, this matters. Because even a small percentage change in your monthly benefit could help you stay ahead of rising costs. So yeah, it's worth understanding how this all works, why the numbers changed, and what you might realistically expect in January. Stick around, because we're going to break it all down in plain English and explain how it could impact your wallet in 2026. Before we get too far into it, I'd love to know, do you remember the biggest Social Security raise you ever got? Or if you've never received benefits, how much do you think would make a real difference for someone? Let me know in the comments. I always enjoy reading your stories. And if this kind of clear financial info helps you, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss future updates. So, what exactly is COLA, and why does it feel like such a big deal each year? Well, the cost of living adjustment is basically Social Security's way of trying to keep up with inflation. If prices go up, like they often do, then ideally, your benefits should too. It's not a bonus. It's really just trying to make sure your money doesn't lose value over time. Now, since 1975, COLAs have been tied to something called the CPIW. That's the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers. It's kind of a mouthful, but what it does is track the prices of everyday goods and services like gas, groceries, rent, you name it. The government compares the average prices from July, August, and September to the same months from the year before. If they've gone up, then you get a raise. If they haven't, or they've gone down, then there's no COLA. And yeah, that's happened before. Some years, there's been a 0% increase, which can feel like a punch in the gut, especially when everything around you seems to cost more. Now for 2026, the early forecasts are looking a little more optimistic. The Social Security Board of Trustees just released updated numbers. Their intermediate estimate, which is kind of their middle-of-the-road guess, puts the 2026 COLA at 2.7%. The low-cost scenario says it could go as high as 3%, while the high-cost estimate lands at 2.4%. And you might be wondering, why did they adjust it upward? What changed? Well, inflation hasn't cooled off as much as folks hoped. Even though the Federal Reserve has been cutting interest rates, it's been pretty cautious. They were expected to cut by 150 basis points, but only ended up cutting by 100. And even with those cuts, prices are still rising faster than expected in certain areas. Add to that some global tensions, things like trade policies, supply chain hiccups, and shifting manufacturing. And you've got a recipe for continued inflation. Energy, food, and transportation are especially volatile right now. And all of that impacts the final COLA number. But here's something not everyone realizes. The COLA is based on a price index that reflects the spending of working-age urban people, not retirees. Which is kind of strange, right? Because the majority of people relying on Social Security are over 65, and they tend to spend more on things like healthcare and prescription drugs. That's why some folks, including advocacy groups like the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, have been pushing for a switch to a different index, the CPI or Consumer Price Index for the elderly. That one gives more weight to things seniors actually spend their money on. But so far, no dice. It hasn't been adopted, mostly due to disagreements in Congress over how much it would cost to make the change. Now, let's talk about how this could affect you directly. If the 2026 COLA ends up being 2.7% and you're currently getting, say, $1,900 a month in benefits, you'd see about $51 more per month. That's a little over $600 extra per year. And for many households, that's the difference between making ends meet or having to cut back somewhere. But even with that increase, it's not always enough to fully offset rising costs, especially in areas like healthcare. Medical expenses tend to go up faster than other prices. So yeah, you might get a raise in January, but your doctor bills or medication copays might eat up that bump pretty quickly. That's one of the big concerns people have. They see these COLA increases in the news and think, oh great, we're getting more money. But then real life hits and they're still falling behind. So then the question becomes, are these adjustments actually helping people keep up with inflation, or are they just a symbolic gesture? That's something experts are still debating. And while the COLA system has helped millions avoid losing ground completely, it might not be enough in today's economy. You see, back in the 70s and 80s, COLA increases were massive, sometimes over 10%. But that was because inflation was out of control. In recent decades, it's been much lower, hovering around 1 to 2% in many years. The current range of 2.4 to 3% feels generous to some only because it's a bit higher than what people may have expected. However, to many it's not enough. One thing to keep in mind is that even though these projections come from the Social Security trustees, which carry a lot of weight, they aren't guarantees. The actual number won't be finalized until early October, after all 3 CPIW months are locked in. That means July, August, and September inflation data will really determine what the increase ends up being. And last year is a good example of how things can shift. The trustees predicted a 2.6% raise, but the final number came in just a little lower at 2.5%. Not a huge difference, but still a reminder that these are just estimates, not promises. Speaking of promises, let's zoom out for a second. There's a bigger conversation happening about the future of Social Security itself. The trust fund that supports retirement benefits is expected to run out in the 2030s unless something changes. Now, that doesn't mean benefits would disappear overnight, but it would likely mean reduced payments unless Congress steps in with reforms. Some groups, like the AMAC Foundation, have been proposing solutions. Their plan focuses on adjusting things like retirement age and benefit formulas rather than raising taxes. President Trump's administration hasn't made any major structural changes yet, but it's clear that economic resiliency and support for retirees are part of the broader messaging. Whether or not those messages turn into lasting policy, though, remains to be seen. So what does that leave us? Well, for now, the 2026 COLA is shaping up to be around 2.7%. It's not massive, but it's higher than some thought it would be. And if inflation keeps holding steady, or even rising a little more, that final number could end up closer to 3%. Still, the actual benefit to you depends on what you spend the most money on. If your rent just went up, or your medication cost doubled, a COLA bump might not fully cover it. But it could still give you a little more breathing room, especially after a couple of tight years. And hey, even though we can't predict the future with total certainty, keeping an eye on this stuff helps you prepare. Whether you're already retired or planning to be in a few years, understanding how COLA works and what drives those numbers can help you make smarter decisions with your money. So, if you found this helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you gave it a like and shared it with someone who might benefit from knowing this too. And again, let me know in the comments, what would a meaningful COLA increase look like to you? Something that actually made a difference. All right, that's it for today. Thanks so much for hanging out with me and having this conversation. There's a lot more to come, especially once we get those official CPI numbers later this year. So keep your eyes out for that. Until then, take care of yourself and stay informed.